Welcome back. In an exclusive investigation, 5 News has found nearly 3/4 of people getting help for long COVID weren't given a face-to-face appointment. Now, it's estimated that 2.1 million people have the condition currently in the UK, and that happens when symptoms last for at least 12 weeks. It is a huge problem. Well, Ruth Liptrop presents this special series for us now. She's already shared with us on this programme about how she has been affected by long COVID, and she's using her experience to find out what can be done to help some of the many others in the same boat.
I've had long COVID for over 2 years now, and to be honest, sometimes it feels like being stuck in a maze. Just when you think you're getting somewhere with your recovery, you hit a dead end and you've got to double back and try something completely different. And it can feel like there's no one to help you find your way out. The difficulty is long COVID isn't just one thing. There are over 200 recorded symptoms, so what works for one person might not help another.
I've had long COVID for 6 months. It's been a challenging journey.
My life has basically been ruined by COVID. I would do anything for a treatment.
I definitely have improved. I'm working full time, but I'm still nowhere near my old self. The long COVID.
I have a breathing disorder, I have sensory overload, I have extreme fatigue.
In my case, it's made my symptoms more forgiving.
When long COVID clinics were announced in England and then eventually in Northern Ireland, it felt like fantastic news, but they haven't always delivered what was promised. We asked clinics what form their treatment was taking, and of the 35 clinics who gave us responses, 73% of patients had their initial consultation by phone or video call. And for 60% of people, even the follow-up wasn't done face-to-face. I met Rebecca a year and a half ago virtually. Like me, she has 2 kids and had a busy job as a nurse, but also as a fitness instructor, which she loved.
People would travel at any distance if they thought they were going to get help and support.
I promised I'd come and see her in Belfast as soon as I was well enough and give her a hug. Oh my God! Hello! I don't know whether to... I know, I feel like I'm going to cry. I told you I'd cry when I met you. I know. She hasn't recovered and has to use a wheelchair when she's out.
I knew it would be emotional when I saw you, like, it's when someone else that has been through it, you actually just know what it's like.
Gets it, yeah.
I experienced the long COVID clinic in Northern Ireland after waiting months to be seen. The person that did mine was very pleasant, however, had no real knowledge of long COVID. Said she didn't really know much about it, which was quite frustrating as the patient who was desperate to get some help. And what they could offer at the time was pulmonary rehab, which consisted of a physio exercise sort of program, which I was not, I didn't fit that criteria because I'm not able, I have post-exertional malaise. And so the outcome of my experience at the long COVID clinic was that I was discharged because I was too sick to treat. I've never heard of a health service discharging someone because they're too sick to treat.
Like me, Rebecca has had to advocate for herself. While understanding that there was no magic bullet for long COVID yet, I began to realise that there was some stuff that could be done for some of the symptoms. When my long COVID was at its worst, there is no way I would have been able to walk around the maze like this. I couldn't walk for more than a couple of 100 metres. My heart would race, my legs would feel weak, and I would feel like I was going to faint. And then somebody told me about POTS. Allow me to introduce Doctors Melanie Danny and Boone Lim, who can explain exactly what POTS is.
Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome is a condition associated with standing up. So it's people who have severe symptoms on standing and walking or in the upright position of chest pain, shortness of breath and palpitations.
And this is caused because long COVID disrupts something called the autonomic nervous system, the bit of your brain that controls functions like heart rate, blood pressure and bowel function. By the way, I wouldn't have known any of this if someone from the long COVID community hadn't told me about POTS.
I found beta blockers really helpful and they made a difference within 24 hours. Why is that? How do they help and are they suitable for everybody?
So beta blockers slows the heart rate down. The problem is beta blockers can also lower your blood pressure. And there are certain groups of patients with long COVID and POTS who start off having very low blood pressures. And if they take a beta blocker, it will floor them even more.
But if they're not suitable for you, there is other stuff you can do to help your symptoms.
Drinking plenty of fluid, up to 3 litres a day, particularly in the morning. Add salt to your diet if your blood pressure is low. And wear your compression garments to help squeeze the blood back to your heart.
So I have these tights. These are not normal tights, these are medical tights. These are the tightest tights ever.
Dr. Asad Khan has tried all of the above for his POTS.
I was bedbound. I was unable to lift my head off the pillow without vomiting. I was unable to tolerate any light, even if a sliver of light made its way between the blinds. I would feel nauseous and actually have physical pain. Being in that state for weeks and weeks led me to contemplate physician-assisted suicide.
But in September last year, he went to Germany for a treatment called apheresis.
After 10 months of having no life, I'm hoping that I can get some of it back.
Some scientists believe long COVID causes microclots in the blood, which in turn prevents cells from getting enough oxygen into the tissues. Apheresis aims to filter these microclots from the blood. It's not currently available in this country and it costs thousands of pounds and is a fairly invasive treatment. So what I wanted to know was he glad that he did it?
I don't regret it. Whilst I'm not cured, it certainly helped me. Yes, it's come at a cost. I've probably spent approximately £50,000 on apheresis and other private treatments, but I feel like I've got a chance of having some kind of life again. I resent the characterization of patients who seek out private treatments as desperate mavericks. We're seriously ill, and the reason we go abroad or end up sometimes treating ourselves is because there's nothing for us within the system.
But Rebecca spent most of her savings on it and it didn't make her better.
I was desperate to try to get a bit better, so I went and I trusted that it might help. Unfortunately for me, it didn't help and it cost an awful lot of money. But I think now, sitting back, looking at 32 months on, living with long COVID, I feel that we have to take a step back and sort of think, right, you know, how is this going to help and is it worth it?
But there are others out there looking at different ways of tackling this microclot issue. And Dr. Doug Kell thinks there could be a drug-based solution called the triple treatment.
So what apheresis does is to remove a lot of stuff, including the microclots, whereas what we're hoping to do is let the body get rid of them naturally and stop further ones from forming. You can't do apheresis on 1 million people. The kit doesn't exist, whereas you could give drugs to 1 million people.
Before that, though, there'd need to be UK proof that microclots exist and controlled trials of the drugs for use with long COVID. The good news, though, is that those drugs are already out there.
It would involve 3 drugs, potentially. 3 established drugs, by the way. I mean, not even new ones. This treatment is used already for people who've had strokes and myocardial heart attacks. It's just not been licensed, as it were, in clinical guidelines for people who've had long COVID, because, of course, there wasn't any such thing beforehand.
So once again, it's a waiting game, which is hard when you've been stuck for so long.
There's organ damage going on.
I first spoke to Danny Altman, who's an immunologist, when I was really unwell in early 2021. I could barely string a sentence together, let alone leave the house, so I had to do it online.
I know what I want to say, and what comes out is...
Finally, I got to meet him in person.
You know, I can imagine a situation where in a year's time, hopefully many of the long COVID people might be starting to get better anyway, and those that aren't, there might be some really good options to offer them.
He's still convinced, though, that COVID is causing autoimmunity in many people.
I've spent most of my life working on this kind of stuff, and there are lots of viruses and bacterial infections that can really disrupt your immunity and even cause full-blown autoimmunity. And I do kind of think about this as a very strong example of that, and we've just got to kind of work it out.
And let's just remind ourselves of some of those symptoms: digestive and gut issues, blood clots, brain fog and cognitive dysfunction, and fatigue, the sort of tiredness that makes you feel like you've been sedated. Oh, and then there's this one. With all of the various symptoms I had going on, the one thing I hadn't thought about was hormones. And then I found out that long COVID can play a nasty trick on us ladies. It just keeps on giving.
These women probably were fairly well before they got COVID, but then overnight, effectively their ovaries have been switched off. So when they come and see me, then actually what they're presenting with is symptoms of the perimenopause. That has been triggered by COVID, so that's why women attribute it to being long COVID, because that's where the problem started.
Dr. Sarah Glynn is a specialist in the connection between long COVID and the menopause. The penny dropped when she kept seeing women of a particular age group coming to her with long COVID symptoms.
The group that are most likely to get long COVID, actually, that account for, I would say, a third to a half of all patients with long COVID, are women between the ages of 40 and 60. And in that age group, a woman has about twice the risk of getting long COVID compared with a man of the same age. And we also observed, for example, that postmenopausal women who were taking HRT had a significantly lower risk of severe illness and death compared with postmenopausal women who were not taking HRT. And gradually, just more and more pieces of the jigsaw started to fit together.
So, HRT, estrogen, progesterone and testosterone, can alleviate the symptoms of perimenopause that have been caused by long COVID. It's made a huge difference to Martine.
In the fatigue and the cognitive issues, you can walk out the room and forget completely what you need to do.
What difference has the HRT made for you?
It's so noticeable. Within a week, my mood had improved, and within a few weeks, my cognition, the levels of cognition were so much higher that I actually felt I could do my job much better.
We've talked about a couple of things that have helped me, but there is other stuff out there, and long COVID patients are leading the way. The Visible app has been developed by someone with long COVID to help people with chronic illness manage their symptoms. And 15 patient experts, including Assad, have been chosen to advise the patient-led biomedical fund, which is investing in research on long COVID. We all want to get better, but it's really important that we don't put ourselves at risk.
From my point of view, as kind of Professor Boring, I'd say please don't go out and try any kind of do-it-yourself scary treatments. Just wait for the proper trial results.
For Rebecca, recovery now is about the little things. What sort of physical things do you want to be able to do now?
Just go for a walk. Walk by myself for maximum 30 minutes with the dogs in the park.
It doesn't feel like it should be too much to want that, does it?
No. No.
What I really want to see is more help for people like Rebecca, and for all of us. We shouldn't have to find our way out on our own. I feel really lucky to have improved to the extent that I have. When you recover from a serious illness, the whole world looks more beautiful. Now, I just want the same for everyone else with long COVID. Ruth Liptrot, 5 News.
Wow, what an insight. So great to see Ruth and others doing well, but what a real insight in terms of what they go through when it comes to long COVID.
Yeah, and you think, as Ruth said in that report, 2.1 million people with long COVID in the UK. And I think I've been at 5 News for 6 months, and that was actually yesterday. It was the first time that I've met Ruth in the flesh, because she's now back at work, and she says she's feeling about 95% now, which is brilliant. And there is so much more to say on this issue. So what we've done is made a special series about it. Have a little look. Hello. Would you like to come into our brand new podcast studio? It's very nice. Come in with me. Because in here, we have the one and only Ruth Liptrot. Now, Ruth and I work together on 5 News, but we're actually here for a brand new podcast, which is all about what you've been through, Ruth, living with long COVID.
Exactly, and we're going to be having a chat about that. We're going to find out what it feels like to have long COVID, and believe me, I know, and we're going to be finding out what you can do to help yourself if you've got it.
There is an awful lot to learn, so make sure you listen wherever you get your podcasts from.